not believe the report's treatment of Biden's memory was accurate or appropriate. Steve.
NTD's Iris Tao reporting live from the White House. Thank you, Iris. So why isn't the title of president listed in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? That was the question even some of the Democrat-appointed justices on the Supreme Court asked at oral arguments today. We spoke with a Colorado Republican candidate for Congress and chairman of the state's GOP about what he witnessed inside the High Court's chamber. Dave Williams, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, Dave, you came all the way from Colorado. How significant was today for you on a personal level, but also for your state and the Republican Party there?
You bet. This was an extremely important case, and I was honored to represent my party and be in the Supreme Court chamber as the justices grappled with this novel legal theory that is, quite frankly, ridiculous. But they were professional. They were all class acts, and they asked thoughtful, deliberative questions that got to the heart of the issue. Ultimately, the questions they were asking was, does the 14th Amendment, Section 3, apply to President Trump or any other president for that matter? And I think what you're going to see in the next 2-3 weeks is that they're going to conclude that this case is something that should never have been brought before them, and they're going to overturn the Colorado decision.
And Dave, so from what I gather right now, it appears, to your point, a lot of those more deliberative questions were actually coming from some of the liberal justices. So could it be possible that we see a unanimous result here in favor of former President Trump?
Right. I mean, you never want to predict how a court's going to adjudicate and then ultimately rule. But from what I witnessed with my own two eyes, it looks like that this is a pretty clear-cut and dry case. I mean, when you have justices that were appointed by Democrat presidents asking the obvious question, how come the title president isn't listed in the enumerated list of offices that would include the disqualification for Section 3 in Amendment 14, then I think they see the writing on the wall. This is something that doesn't apply to President Trump, and didn't even get into the insurrection itself, right? I mean, there was a lot of debate on what does it mean to have engaged in an insurrection. Different states could have different standards. If we actually affirm the Colorado decision, then does this open up the door for other states to kick off Joe Biden in retaliation to this decision? I mean, these were all thoughtful, good questions that I think are ultimately leading to a favorable ruling for the Colorado Republican Party and ultimately Donald Trump.
And Dave, speaking of other states, what will this mean who are, either filing similar suits or are waiting to see what happens with this?
Hawaii.
Well, this question was posed to the petitioners, and I think the answer ultimately was it depends on how the Supreme Court rules. They could very well narrowly rule this to only apply to Colorado, or they could make a nationwide sort of ruling that applies to everyone else that's grappling with this question. Ultimately, I think the Supreme Court is going to settle it once and for all. They're going to put the issue to bed, and they're going to provide clarity on this. And what you're going to see is, I think, what every normal, common sense person knows, that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was never intended to be used 100-plus years later, post-Civil War, on a billionaire former president who clearly didn't engage in insurrection. And we look forward to that ruling in short order.
Dave, what does this mean, I guess, when you start to think about potential election interference?
This is absolutely election interference. I think that's been apparent from the very beginning. You have desperate Democrats or never Trump folks that just want to do everything they can to stop Donald Trump from getting back into the White House, especially given the bad economy that we have, the crises around the world. Everyone knows that Joe Biden is unfit to serve, and when the rematch comes back with Donald Trump on the ballot, he's going to win and probably win in the landslide.
Does Colorado have any chance of going red in the upcoming election?
It's trending in the right direction. We saw a recent poll that showed Donald Trump gaining some steam. So I think, there's only so much people will tolerate. Joe Biden is certainly on his heels. It's going to be a referendum on him, and we think we're going to win the day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
They strategize how to take back the House majority this election cycle. NTV's Melina Wisecup is on site with the
Yeah, they want all these
the Senate voting today
illegal aliens to help.
national security bill, but this time without any border security provisions. That story and more when we return. Entering a heated election cycle and what the president had to say.
Well, Steve, one recurring theme that we've heard throughout the course of this entire Democrat retreat is Democrats trying to paint Republicans as the party of chaos, unable to get anything done in the halls of Congress. And this comes at perfect timing for House Democrats, just based on the events that we saw unfold over this past week, back-to-back failed votes. For example, President Biden actually praised this unified minority for being able to tank those Republican votes, and such as preventing them from impeaching his DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, as well as taking the standalone Israel aid package. Now, in addition to taking jabs at Republicans, Democrats are also trying to lay out their campaign strategy heading into this election cycle. The issues that they're focused on are things such as abortion rights, gun regulations, etc. But importantly enough, they're also trying to get their message straight on the economy. We know that's a key issue for voters heading into the 2024 elections. Here's what the president had to say about this during today's keynote speech.
The things we're doing not only help people, but they're reducing the deficit of good economic policy. We're in a position to win in 2024, I think.
I doubt that.
Now, keep in mind, this comes against the backdrop of repeated low poll ratings for President Biden. As a matter of fact, a recent NBC poll shows President Biden behind former President Trump by 20 points. And Democrats, of course, are trying to brush this off when they were asked by reporters how they plan to separate themselves from these low poll numbers as they try to take back the majority in the House. Democrats argued that
Biden has got a chance.
Felt the impact of the legislation that they were able to pass in the Democrat-controlled Congress. Listen to this.
We have work to do in making sure we're communicating to communities what we have done.
Unemployment at record lows, inflation is booming, and wages are rising. But we know that not everyone is feeling the benefits of that economic recovery yet. And House Democrats are ready to finish the job.
Nobody is.
So Democrats have actually themed this Democrat retreat with the words "finish the job." So we can expect to see them continue using this language during this entire
little
plot
to take with the immigrants.
Majority in the Republican-controlled House. Steve?
NTV's Melina Wisecup live from the Democrats. 67 votes in favor and 32 against. The amended foreign aid package will be debated and amended on the Senate floor.
It's a very good thing that the Senate has just voted to proceed to the National Security Supplemental. This is a good first step.
The new bill includes $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel, and nearly $5 billion for Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific to deter Chinese aggression.
That much more added to the deficit.
For humanitarian assistance for civilians in Gaza, the West Bank, and other conflicts worldwide. The bill does not include any provisions for the southern border. Republicans blocked a broader bill that included border security measures earlier this week, and Republican senators have already signaled that they will introduce amendments that will prolong the process indefinitely. If the bill is approved by the Senate, it faces uncertainty in the House, where many Republicans oppose Ukraine aid. After spending as a representative of the 5th District of Washington State, in a statement on X today, she thanked her staff and family for providing support during her tenure. She did not, however, give a reason for her decision, but added it's time to serve her district in new ways. China and Russia have condemned U.S. airstrikes against Houthis in the Red Sea.
Naturally.
Houthis continue airstrikes with this week at American and British ships. Are the U.S. airstrikes having an effect? And what more should the U.S. be doing to deter Houthi aggression in that region? To find out, we spoke to Justin Logan of the Cato Institute.
Take money away from Iran.
Justin Logan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Justin, I want to get your analysis of the U.S. airstrikes that began last week against Iran-backed Houthis and the Iranian military targets in retaliation for the January 28th drone attack that killed 3 American soldiers. Do you think these airstrikes have been effective, and what do you think of the administration waiting 5 days to retaliate and then essentially telegraphing the attacks in advance?
Yeah, the administration wants to look like it's doing something, and it is doing something. But I think, like the Saudi war against Yemen that took several years, which the United States was helping with targeting on, the ability to eliminate the Houthis' capability to mount these kinds of attacks is not going to be reached by these kinds of airstrikes, right? The Saudis absolutely pulverized Yemen over a period of several years and didn't get that result. So the idea that these standoff pinprick airstrikes are going to do it is fanciful. And so the administration's taking heat both from hawks who say it's not enough and from doves who say it's not going to work. And, I'm afraid that both have a point.
You're absolutely right. The U.S. and the UK's airstrikes here don't appear to be deterring the Houthis from continuing their attacks. Houthi militia reportedly launching
tell them where they're going to hit, and everybody disappears.
One British in the early hours of Tuesday. Could we see more escalation of attacks on U.S. ships and more retaliation from the Biden administration if they do continue?
I think that's maybe the worst case scenario, is that this gets sucked into a sort of perpetual motion cycle where, we retaliate for a Houthi attack, the Houthis bide their time for a bit and then mount another attack. And then it's incumbent on them, on us
their
again,
money.
To retaliate again without achieving any strategic end. I think the administration has been at pains to say they're defending the principle of freedom of navigation. That's what we're after here. But it's also important not to overstate the impact that the Houthi strikes have had on the global economy. The best estimates that we have is that the worst case scenario here is that if this were to keep up, it could cost 0.1% of global GDP, which is really a rounding error in that sense. And they're not seeing
man with a poor memory reacted to the special counsel report. He said in a statement, "I was pleased to see they reached the conclusion I believed all along they would reach." President Biden huddles with House Democrats at their retreat in Northern Virginia as the minority strategizes how to take back the House of Representatives. Entities Melina Weisskopf reports from the retreat.
One recurring theme that we've heard throughout the course of this entire Democrat retreat is them trying to paint Republicans as the party of chaos, unable to get anything done in the halls of Congress. And this is perfect timing for Democrats, considering the events that we saw unfold over the past week with back-to-back failed votes. President Biden actually, in his speech just an hour ago, praised the unified minority for being able to tank those votes, such as by preventing Republicans from being able to impeach his DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and then right after that, they were able to tank a standalone Israel aid package. Now, in addition to trying to take jabs at the Republican Party, Democrats are also laying out their priorities and their campaign strategy for this election season. They're focused on topics like abortion rights, gun regulations, etc. But importantly enough, they're also trying to get their message together on the economy. We know this is a huge issue for voters heading into the 2024 presidential election. Here's what the president had to say about this during today's keynote speech.
The things we're doing not only help people, but they're reducing the deficit of good economic policy. We're in a position to win in 2024, I think.
Now, keep in mind, this comes against a backdrop of repeated low poll ratings for President Biden. As a matter of fact, a recent NBC poll shows President Biden behind former President Trump by 20 points. And Democrats, of course, are trying to brush this off when they were asked by reporters how they plan to separate themselves from these low poll numbers as they try to take back the majority in the House. Democrats argued that Americans haven't felt the impact of the legislation that they were able to pass in the Democrat-controlled Congress. Listen to this.
We have work to do in making sure we're communicating to communities what we have done.
Unemployment at record lows, inflation is cooling, and wages are rising. But we know that not everyone is feeling the benefits of that economic recovery yet, and House Democrats are ready to finish the job.
Now, Democrats have literally themed this conference with the words, finish the job. So we're likely to see this as a recurring theme throughout this campaign cycle as Democrats fight to take back the majority in the House of Representatives. Reporting from Leesburg, Virginia, Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A huge shakeup in Ukraine's military today. President Volodymyr Zelensky replacing the country's military chief, who many Ukrainians see as a national hero. This comes after months of speculation about a rift between Zelensky and General Valery Zaluzhny.
Today we had a frank discussion about what needs to be changed in the army. Urgent changes.
The announcement marks the biggest rift in Ukraine's military since the start of the war. Replacing Zaluzhny is seen as a huge gamble. It comes at a time when Russian forces are gaining the upper hand nearly 2 years into the war. Everyday Ukrainians who spoke to the media today said they are not happy with the decision. Firing the military chief could hurt Zelensky politically. Public polling shows trust in the general at over 90%. That's a bit higher than Zelensky's 77% from late last year. The former commander of Ukraine's land forces will now take over as military chief. Israel Defense Forces continue to battle their way further into the Gaza Strip as the fighting intensifies against Hamas terrorists. But will the IDF conduct military operations in Rafah, where over 1 million displaced Palestinians are now sheltering? NTD's Jason Perry has the war update. Including assault, obstruction, evidence tampering, and hindering prosecution. The NYPD said the physical altercation ensued as officers tried to break up a disorderly group outside a migrant shelter. According to police, the officers were repeatedly kicked and punched and were left with minor injuries. A former California police chief fired from his post last year has sued the city of Oakland and its mayor. He says he was unlawfully terminated in retaliation. Amid rising crime, state officials are now stepping in. On Thursday, Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta said they will deploy state attorneys to boost criminal prosecutions in Oakland and the East Bay. This comes as Newsom announced on Tuesday he would deploy 120 California Highway Patrol officers to Oakland to assist with targeted crackdowns on criminal activity, including vehicle and retail theft. Recent footage posted on the Citizen app shows a man dressed in black moving from table to table, quickly snatching phones from their displays and stuffing them into his pockets. He then walks out the store and is by 2 police cars. Oakland has been without a permanent police chief since LaRon Armstrong.
And that's the story that they tell. Unfortunately, it's not the officer's fault. It's the policy that prohibits the officer from pursuing that car, that stops him from pursuing it.
Last month, In-N-Out Burger announced it would close its first location in its 75-year history due to car break-ins, property damage, theft, and robberies at its only restaurant in Oakland. Coming up, have the Supreme Court justices giving any indication on how they'll rule on the Colorado ballot case. Our guest says he expects the High Court to side with former President Trump.